this lecture what spiritual beings did this. But they took a hold of those bodies and they became the group souls of the animal kingdom. That's how the animal kingdom was propagated during this crisis.
Can you say that again?
Remember, we got these bodies, okay, they're spiritual bodies, but they're very dense. Some of them became so dense that they could not take up human souls. And only 2 of them made it before the moon beings were compelled to withdraw. But there were others who continued to propagate, but they were too dense to take up the human souls as the Luciferic beings guided us back into the progeny of Adam and Eve.
So they
Then the spiritualities took over control of those bodies that were too dense for us to incarnate in as human individuals, and they made them into the animal kingdom. So the animal kingdom has group souls. So you have the elephants have a group soul, the mouse does, the rat, the lion, they have a group soul. Because if you understand animals, and I was fortunate enough to grow up in the wilds of Africa as a boyhood. My boyhood I spent in the wilds of the bush. In Kenya, I grew up on a ranch.
I was going to guess that you were from Kenya because you speak like your friend's father.
I do. Right, so I was born in Kenya, and I grew up on a 50,000 acre ranch that my father had purchased. And there was everything on there except for elephants. Lions, cheetahs, buffalo, hippopotamus.
Snakes?
Hmm?
You see any snakes?
Sure, we had snakes. Scorpions, butterflies up there, magnificent butterflies. We had 350 species of bird, different species of bird, giraffe, all kinds of antelope, different kinds of antelope, zebra. So, as a boy, when I was at home on vacation, from the time of 8 years until I left Kenya when I was 14. When I was at home vacation, because I went to prison school, boarding school, I called it prison, I hated it. I don't want to talk about it. So I was in purgatory for most of the year, and then the other time I was in paradise.
Yeah.
So I flipped back between purgatory and paradise. And then when I was in paradise, I really was in paradise. There's no doubt about that. So I used to get up, have my breakfast, take my gun and my dog, and I just wander off into the bush for about 3 to 4 hours, come back for lunch. So I had an opportunity to observe many, many animals. And of course my mother, who was a single mother at that time, my father died of a heart attack at the age of 33.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, his karma, I wonder what his karma was. And on their second honeymoon to boot. Not
Maybe
very
he ate too
pleasant.
much meat or something.
I don't know, because I'm only 5. I have no idea about this stuff. But anyway, he, what was I going to say? Yeah, so my mother would say to me, well, we need some meat, because we ate meat when I was growing up. We ate meat, and we ate dairy, and we ate sugar, and we ate butter, and cream, and eggs, and bacon, and everything. We ate all that stuff. I didn't know a grain from the back of my head. I had no idea what a grain was, or a bean for that matter. Except when I was invited to have a meal with the workers, the natives. They invited me to their village to have a meal with them, and I went into their hut, and what did we have there?
Beans, rice and beans.
Millet.
We had maize. We had maize, meal, cornmeal.
Cornmeal.
It was more like corn grits, like a big pile of them. It was amazing.
Awesome.
They had this big pile of cornmeal,
Delicious.
big pile, steaming, right? Then they had a circular thing that rotated, and each of this, there was little bowls with savories in them. So what you would do is, you would grab yourself by hand, a chunk of this cornmeal, corn grits. It was more like corn grits. And you make a ball of it, and then you stick your thumb in it, to make a cup, and then one of the servers came out, you take one and pour it in there and eat it. That's what we ate for lunch that day. It was really cool. That was my first experience of eating, until macrobiotics, of eating grain. The only one experience of eating whole grains. Organic whole grain. And that's what they ate.
And even today, if you travel where indigenous people
And
are,
what do you
you'll find
say?
that's
What do
their
you
diet.
notice when you see all these people? There's not one obese person within miles.
Yeah.
No one. Except for, actually there were two of them, and one of them was the head man, so he got too much meat in him, and the other one was our cook.
He was
First cook, Karaoke, his name was. But
probably-
then Zoka, our second cook and housekeeper, he was slim as you could be. Anyway, so I would have to get to know the habits, because once you understand and know about the habits of one individual of a species, you know of the habits of every individual of the same species. So you could predict. I could predict after I observed them for some time. You know, I knew their tracks. I could track them. I knew what their spore looked like. You know, their hooves, which I could tell by looking at whether this was a dik-dik or a duiker or a reed buck or a water buck or an impala or whatever. I could tell just by looking at their tracks and their feces. And I knew where they were going to be any time of day. I said, okay, so my mother would say, well, we're running out of meat, you better go and shoot an impala. And she'd tell me what to do. Oh, shoot a guinea fowl or shoot a francolin. These are game birds that you could eat. So instead of shooting impala, so I'd say, okay, fine. So I'd just go to where I knew where they would be, and I'd sit and wait for them, and then I'd pick out a suitable candidate and shoot it. And that was it. And then we'd take it home, skin it, gut it, and have our meat for the next, 6 months. So I probably shot about 8 or 10 over the course of my 8 years. Well, 8 years old until 14, probably about that many. Plus a few Franklin and guinea fowl and bustards. So I've asked for their forgiveness since then, since I learned about all this stuff.
I was going to say you might meet them later.
My karmic. Well, the thing is about the karma of animals, they don't have an individual karma like us, because they're not individuals, so they can't. But the thing is what we owe to them. This is the point of this whole lecture. How's the time doing? Oh, it's pretty good. We've got a lot of time to go, so I can get into some detail here.
Was it about 7:40?
Yeah. Yeah, so the thing is that essentially the way to picture our relationship to the animal kingdom is that they essentially sacrificed their development as individual human beings because they couldn't make it over the crisis period, and they became a lower, in the scale of spiritual hierarchies, they became a lower hierarchy than us, and they're subordinate to us. Now, this knowledge means that we have a great deal of, we owe a great debt to the animal kingdom, because it was by them lowering themselves that we could elevate ourselves to a higher level. Now, one thing that characterizes the animal kingdom from us today is that they come into the world with incredible talent, which they don't have to learn. You know, the beaver can build an amazing lodge, the honey bee can build an incredible hive, the wasp an incredible nest. I mean, you can go on and on. The key characteristic of this is all something is a talent, a natural talent they have that they don't have to learn. In comparison, we are extremely clumsy when we come into the world. You know, you watch an animal grow from the time it's born, which I had many occasions to observe. You know, they're up and about and they're running like crazy within literally hours after they're born. And we take 7 months at least just to begin to learn how to walk. And at one time we were endowed with those same talents that the animals have, but we took those talents, or rather the hierarchies that have to do with our development, made those talents go inward so that we could then perfect our nervous system and our brains and our internal organ system so that we could be suitable vehicles for the insertion, so to speak, of the ego in us. Whereas the animals, see, the actual animal itself, what we see is the buffalo or the cheetah or the dog or the cat is simply an outward manifestation of the group soul of that animal. The actual animal itself lives in a sphere, the spiritual bordering worlds bordering on this one. And if those animals, if we'd had the same fate as the animals, we would have never been able to incarnate into physical bodies, and we would have been hovering in the next world above us, on this, bordering on this one. So we came down into the earth because we needed to have the physical body as our, shall we say, as our vehicle to be able to negotiate our way around the physical world in order to develop ourselves spiritually out of our own resources. That's the difference between us and the animal. Now the animal, he doesn't say anything about the ego of the animal. What he says, the difference between when you look at the animal, as we look at the animals as they are around us, what they are constituted of is a physical body, etheric body, and astral body. But the astral body is actually a group soul. So we have a group soul, as I said, of the elephants, the mouse, whatever. But he doesn't say anything about the ego. So I don't know anything about the ego of the animal kingdom. Whereas I do know about the ego of the plant kingdom and the mineral kingdom. So that's a story for another day when I find out more about the animal kingdom. Because there's 450 volumes of Steiner's work. You know, and I haven't read them all by any stretch of the imagination. Probably about 100. I have 150 of them, and I probably read